Hey everybody, welcome to Wife with a Purpose. I am Ayla. I have another elder interview in store for you guys today. I am really excited about how popular these interviews have been with you guys, and I'm really happy that you've been enjoying the one that I did before, and hopefully you will enjoy the one I have for you today. So before we get started, just to let you know, if you've never tuned in before, I am Ayla, and this is Wife with a Purpose channel. And my elder interviews are simply a time to sit and visit with an elder of our culture, of our community. And I define an elder as being anyone who has grandchildren. So if they're old enough to have grandchildren, they're an elder. And we can gain some information and some wisdom from their life experiences. Obviously, people who are elders in our community now have been through enormous cultural and political and historical change in their lifetime. There's so much that we can learn from that, as well as just getting their stories recorded. As we all know, the leftist media, one of their best tools and devices that they use against us and against our culture is simply to try to erase it. And every time that we can kind of lay down a little bit more information, get it recorded, get it in the annals of public history, I think that it does a great service to our people and to our culture and to our nation. So if you would like to support the work that I do, you can always visit wifewithapurpose.com/support. I'm also at paypal.me/wifewithapurpose. And if you would like to get a little special treat, you can sign up for my Gab account premium. So go to gab.ai/wifewithapurpose, sign up for my premium content. It's just a couple of bucks a month, and you get to have get behind the scenes footage, behind the scenes photos, and some of my behind the scenes thoughts, things that I don't share with the general public, that are a little bit maybe more private, or things that I just don't put out there for everybody to hear. So if you want to be hooked into that, definitely subscribe to my premium content. And without further ado, I think I will allow our interviewee today to introduce himself. So why don't you just go ahead and start by telling us your name and just a little bit of, like a little brief introductory, like a little synopsis of who you think, who you are, and what you think we should know about you.
Okay, well, my name is Hal Shurtleff. I am the co-founder and director of Camp Constitution, which we'll be talking about. And I do appreciate the opportunity. Born and raised and live in Boston, married. We'll be celebrating our 25th anniversary in a few days. Mm-hmm. And we have 5 children. And I am not a grandparent, but I'm hopefully very close to it, because I got a married daughter, and I'm hoping that we'll get some news soon. And I've been involved. We started Camp Constitution in 2009. I'm also a member of the Sons of the American Revolution. Yeah, and I host a radio show, and we have a YouTube channel. So you see a lot of Camp Constitution. There's a lot of, I think, good quality material on there. So we're doing things all the time outside of the summer camp program. I travel around the region promoting limited government under the Constitution and working at information tables and a whole array of things.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, before we dive into the interview portion, do you have a website you want to put out there that we can let everybody know? And we'll remind them throughout the show, but tell us about your website where they can find more about you.
campconstitution.net. And that's what, it's interesting too. You said the cultural changes. The first thing it came up with in 1980, I was just out of the Army, United States Army. And I went on the subway to downtown Boston, where I bought a .22 rifle and 500 rounds of ammunition, and, just gave them cash, put it in a bag, and went home on the subway. And I tell people that today, and they can't believe it. They think, oh, that couldn't be true. I said, yes, that's true. I said, it was not a big deal. I didn't shoot anybody. Nobody. I did carry it openly, of course, but today that would be a very impossible thing to do.
Oh, yeah, that sounds like a fantasy world. Like that doesn't even sound plausible in my brain.
Yeah. Now, where you
Wow.
are in Utah, it's a different world. But living in Boston, it's that's something that, well, I told a reporter, a liberal reporter from the Boston Globe, that about 15 years ago, and she wouldn't believe me.
I bet. I bet. Well let's start out with your childhood. Where are you from? What was your childhood like growing up?
Well, I was born right in the city of Boston. My dad was a pharmacist, had a small drugstore eventually, which went out of business. That sort of got me. I was always a conservative minded person. He was a very hardworking man. He was a World War II veteran. It was interesting, too. He knew General Patton, the famous World War
Oh
II general.
wow.
He met him in Sicily and had a nice conversation with him. And somewhere is a letter he got from him, letter of accommodation. And I had the privilege of meeting his son when I was stationed in Germany in 1978 or 79. And I had a very interesting dialogue with him, which gave me a 4-day pass. My motor
Nice.
was so happy about the experience. And he said, "Yes, Shurtleff, you don't have to, I don't have to see you till Tuesday." So it was interesting there. So I went to public school, and this is sort of two things that always I was always a conservative. I know that you had from a leftist background, which is a lot of people had experience. But my dad had a small business, and we were robbed at one point. That's when the drug culture, 1967.
Mm.
It was New Year's Day, New Year's Eve, and we get a phone call the store's been robbed. And we got to the place. They caught the two guys, and my dad's in court, and he sees the judge winking to the attorney, who was a state rep, and the guys got off into technicality. And about 10 robberies later, we're out of business, and very difficult times for us. And I said, the system isn't working. And then I was a student in Boston during the height of the forced busing, and I could see how
Mm.
you could say the insider types, but how the left creates division, creates hatred, and where there was very little racial problems in Boston. My experience anyway, it became horrible. I mean, it was just we had curfews, and forget about, nothing was going on educationally. So if you went to school in that time frame, although as I became more informed, I realized just how rotten the public schools are. In fact, I was a good friend of the late Sam Blumenfeld. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, and not, you should be. Sam was a pioneer in the homeschool movement, and I met him in, I think it was 1989, and I was sort of a mentor. I mean, he was a mentor of mine, and he basically talked about how the look-say method was introduced back in the 30s, and the philosophy of these so-called progressive educators was, dumbing people down. And he goes back to the John Dewey in 1898.
Mm.
So early on, I realized how bad the schools were. And as I had got married and had children, we homeschooled from day one. And every so often you think, gee, are we doing the right thing? I know it's very tough, having a lot of, like, you experience that, of course, experiencing it now. And I would play one of Sam's cassettes, some speech he gave, and I said, what was I thinking? Well, he passed away in 2017, and I inherited his library, pretty vast library of books, and he actually had some letters. He and Ezra Taft Benson were friends, and I have their
Mm.
correspondence. It's kind of interesting,
Oh
as an
wow.
but I don't know if you can see it here, but on our website, we created the Sam Blumenfeld archive. And if you go to the website, you'll see a little drop down. On that archive, we have probably about a month's worth of speeches, audio or video. We have most of his writings, some of his books available in a free PDF. And I would say the most important thing he did, in my opinion, was his alpha phonics. This was a 128 lessons. And when you're done with it, if either a child or even an adult who didn't learn to read properly will become a very good, highly literate reader. And that's available as a free download, plus all of the lessons in audio or video. And last year, we got over 2 million views alone. And then you have some of his books. He wrote a book, How to Tutor, back in the early 70s. And Sam had a very interesting, he was from a Jewish background, sort of a nominal religious, there's a God, but they just sort of observed some of the holidays. But World War II veteran, he became an atheist. But as he was doing research on education in the United States, he found the New England Calvinists, and that brought him to Christianity. So there's an article, why I became a Christian. And
Oh
some people,
wow.
they'll pick up a Bible track, and get saved or what have you. With Sam, he read it. he read the Institute of Religion. It was like 800 pages or something like that, and that little story is available. I think it was published for the first time. He also he gave me the rights to this long before he passed away, but he wrote a book called it was how the left created the neo-Nazi movement in the United States. And it was basically a book about George Lincoln Rockwell and his belief that Rockwell was a communist operative. And that's available. What it was, we never, it's the manuscript. So like 500 pages, and there's comments throughout the book. But it's a very fascinating study. So there's a lot of great things there. It's a free resource too. All we just ask is get online, just give us an email, and you get an occasional email, from our activities, what we do. Yeah, so.
Wow. Okay. So you grew up in the New England culture, and
Boston. Yeah.
yeah, in Boston. Okay. And your father owned the small store, and you saw the drug culture come in. You saw the robberies and the thievery increase. Your father couldn't keep his business. And then your father was in the military. You were in the military. What was your mother like? What was that relationship like? Do you have siblings?
Oh yeah, I have two sisters. I actually have a half brother. He was born in 1943, and he's as liberal as can be. And every so often, I'll bump into people that know him, and he's actually a doctor of education at University of Massachusetts and University in Boston.
Oh.
And there was an interesting story. I was able to reunite my father and my brother. I haven't seen each other before, and my dad died in '91. It was a few years, and I believe there are some well-intentioned liberals out there. They're good meeting people, and I thought my brother was one of them. But it was a few years after we reconciled my dad, and before my dad passed away, I was invited to do a public access show in the town of Newton, which is just outside of Boston. And the gentleman invited me was believe it or not, a conservative Democrat. Yeah, there's still a few in the world, rare species though. And then he uninvited me, and he said, we'll have to postpone it for a while. I said, okay, just give me a call. About a year or two later, he got a hold of me, and he said, your brother's from Newton. I said, yeah, how did you know? Well, I hate to tell you this, he said, but you were going to be my first guest on my show, and he said, my brother was a member of the board. He was on the cable station board of trustees, and he threatened to resign if I was his guest. But he had since resigned, and then the guy said he didn't want to come off on a bad start. So I said, that's okay. So that shows you just how intolerant people like that are.
Yeah, and what year was this?
Oh, 1993 or 94, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Because I know that from perspective of somebody like me, it kind of seems like the liberals have gotten even have that the absolute refusal to even engage with people of a different opinion seems to be an almost recent thing. But it looks like, here I'm learning from you right now, you've had experiences that go back almost 2 decades now of liberals just, they're not even going to speak with you, if you're conservative.
It's almost like an intellectual closed shop or an ideological closed shop.
Yeah.
Just a couple of years ago, a gentleman, I can't call him a gentleman, Ed Markey, he was a U.S. congressman running for the Senate. And he happened to be at a supermarket just a short distance from my home. And I didn't know he was going to be there. I was just on an errand. I said, well, thanks to, you get your Facebook. I have my phone. And I gave everybody copies of the Constitution that were there congregating around him. Probably for the first time they've ever seen one. And I asked a few questions. I asked questions about immigration. He didn't want to answer. He talked about jobs and how much he wants American jobs. I said, well, you supported NAFTA and the WTO. I said, what are you going to repeal them? And he did. He avoided my questions. So the guy next to me, he actually poked me, and I said, look, if I poked you, you'd be rolling on the ground crying assault and have me arrested. I said, so don't poke me. And he said, you shouldn't be here. I said, no. He said, I'm born and raised here. I said, I have every right to speak my mind as anybody else. I said, I will not allow Boston to be a closed shop, an ideological closed shop. And we had an interesting experience. It made a lot of media around the country too. Last summer, I applied for a petition to raise the Christian flag on Boston City Hall Plaza. Now, there's what you call a public access flagpole. The Chinese communists raised their flag to celebrate the Chinese Revolution, where they killed about 60 million people. And I think didn't you do a really good video on communism and genocide recently? Was that your video?
No, I haven't done one recently.
Okay.
It might have been somebody else.
Yeah, okay. and the rainbow flag for the
Mm.
homosexuals. Now the transgender have their own flag. These flags are flown, the flag of Cuba. So I waited, 10 or so days, and I knew they were dragging their feet. They finally gave me a flat out refusal. They said it was a violation of the First Amendment. And what's fascinating is that the email address of this official no was the city seal, City of Boston. Well, most people don't realize it because they don't speak Latin, but the city seal contains a Bible verse from the Old Testament. May God favor us as He favored our forefathers. From the Book of Kings. I
Yeah.
said so. Anyway, we did a legal group got a hold of us and said they will pursue this. We haven't filed it yet. I'm hoping any day now, but I am not going to back down. It's pro bono, thankfully. We exist on the generosity of people. We couldn't afford a lawsuit like this, but this group is called. Anyway, it will come to me. But there's a number of groups out there that defend Christian. The Liberty Council is the name of this group, and they're based in Florida. And they came forward, and it made WorldNet Daily. It made the daily front page of the Boston Herald, and all over the country actually. So we're hoping that the First Amendment doesn't say separation of church and state. That's totally misinformation. The First Amendment says Congress will not establish a religion, nor deny the free exercise thereof. It has nothing to do with this idea of a separation of church and state. Not that we want a state religion. I think that would be a very bad idea. And it was interesting too that Massachusetts had a state church until the 1830s, I believe. It was a congregational church, and so the Constitution, that First Amendment, was been around while there were state churches. So that's another some more misinformation that even a lot of conservatives kind of buy into that, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I'm glad that you brought up that point because I'm not really knowledgeable on the subject of, the Constitution and the interpretation and all of that. That's not like my strong suit, but I have heard that before from other, for lack of a better term, very conservative conservatives saying that, yeah, there isn't really that separation of church and state. It's
But
more just about the church, there not being a state, official state church, but that doesn't mean you can't put up a Christian flag on government property.
You did ask me about my mom too. I
Hmm.
didn't want to. She passed away in 2004, and I have to. But my parents are wonderful people, and I think because they were together, because we had they were no parent is perfect, and I'm sure your children as they get older say, "Mom was a great," but she, and I'm sure I'm the same way, and we get nothing but compliments by adults about our children, and how much. And I says, well, some of it's just God's grace. Anyway, she went to school with Leon Trotsky's niece, and
Wow.
yeah, uh, she was raised. Her father, my grandfather, whom I never met, he died in the early 30s. He was a very wealthy man, and he lost everything during the Depression. I mean, from whatever, a millionaire to nothing.
Wow.
And he had a very good attitude about it. He said, "I make money, I lose money, I'll make it again," and that was his attitude. And he actually told my mother that Franklin Roosevelt was a communist. He knew. So this is before he became president. He is a communist. So I probably have some of the genetic makeup there.
Oh man, that's funny. So wow, so your mother had a very interesting life in history
She
then
did. Yeah,
herself.
yeah, she did.
Yeah. So was she a stay-at-home mother or did she work
She was
outside
a
of the home?
stay-at-home mom, and she sometimes would work in my dad's drugstore to help her. And she had a few times a part-time job when it was possible. Because when
Yeah.
they talk about white privilege, well, it didn't extend to us. We had to work hard, and I didn't realize, when you're poor, I had a good childhood. I didn't realize we were poor. We couldn't go on vacations to Cape Cod like a lot of people did. We didn't even have a car. We had a broken TV set on top of another broken TV set, and our sofa was a cot. And my mother would stretch a meal for a week. But, to me, it was a great life. And Red Sox games for 25 cents or 50 cents for a ticket and sit in the bleachers and, that kind of thing. Hop on the subway as children. I would, when my buddies would hop on the subway, go to a baseball game. We had a beautiful field. We had a pool, swim all day for 10 cents. So that was a good, the ponies would come up on the hill where we lived. The guy would bring his little ponies for pony rides. And so we thought we didn't realize we were poor because we thought things were pretty good.
Oh yeah, definitely. And a lot of people ask me because I have six children and they say, "Well, how can you afford six kids? And how can this your husband must be a millionaire?" And I said, "Yeah, I wish." You know, we're, very working class. But that's the thing is that you don't have to have a lot of entertainment money. There's a lot of things that moms can do to stretch the food budget, and a lot of home cooking you can do. And then there's a lot of things about just being happy together as a family and doing things like going to the park and all of it. You don't, and not every child needs to have their own bedroom, and you don't need to be going to Cape Cod, every summer, like you were saying,
Or
the
Disney
kids have,
World.
right, your children are going to have just as nice a childhood, if not better. I had a Catholic friend growing up, and her family, so she had a large family, comparatively speaking, to the people around us, and they were very poor. Her dad worked very hard, but he was a construction worker, and he didn't make a lot of money. And there were times where they were just eking by, and there were times that her mother, literally for Christmas, all they got were some sock puppets that her mother had made from old socks. And then when she became a teenager, her dad fell into this new construction business. And during this boom period, anyways, he started making a lot of money. Suddenly they had all this money. And she would tell me over and over again, as when we were teenagers, she was happier when they were poor. She said, I was happier because now mom wants to do this, dad wants to do that. They fight more, they fight about money. She said, we were happier when we had less money, and I think that's something that is overlooked, and people today were told one of the things that they use to scare off people from having big families is, oh, well, you can't afford to do the best, give your kids the best of everything, so therefore you shouldn't even have them. And as you're saying, you didn't even know you were poor. You had a very nice childhood with lots of wonderful memories.
Well, with my I had an opportunity to travel a lot with what I did for what I do now, when I did in the past, and I looked at the whole country as a classroom. And my children, when they could, would accompany me sometimes overnight for a few days, and we would take them to museums. We would take them to cultural things, art museums, historical, because I'm a big history guy, and we've been to presidential homesteads, state houses, and historical places throughout the region. We actually took a trip. I took two of my children to. We went to Salt Lake City for an event, and then I spent a few days. We went up to the Promontory Point with the Golden Spike Railroad, and we sat in it. I'm not a Mormon, by the way, but we sat in the Mormon Tabernacle Choir rehearsal. Did some historical sites around there. Went to the Missile Range Museum. Just an incredible thing. And my children they got an experience that, and I love books, but you can't always get in a book. I remember one time my daughter, who's now 25 or 24, she was learning about Noah Webster. I says, well, I got to be in Connecticut. Let's go to his house. And we drive down to his house, and this is where he grew up, the great Noah Webster, the man who gave us this great English American dictionary. So, and I love books, but I think, especially when you're in New England. Now, there's history everywhere, but in New England, we have so much of it. New England, New York, Pennsylvania. And my children have been into Independence Hall. They've been in the White House. They've been at Smithsonian Institute. They've been to every state capitol, I think, in 10 or 15 states, you see. And so they got a chance to see history and meet political people and so forth, come to hearings, and that's something you could probably do where you are, go to a city hall meeting, go to a state house meeting and see how government is run. And so they get a firsthand experience.
Oh yeah, that's a great suggestion. I mean, as far as just something to do as a family, but that is also educational. It's homeschool. It's a wonderful childhood memory. It's, everything. And, my kids are involved a lot in scouting and programs like that. And they do a lot of that sort of things when they're earning badges and things like that, where they go, sit in on a courtroom hearing and see how, when they're earning civics badges and things and how that functions and learning about their local history. And of course, everybody, even if you don't live in New England, everyone has history of some sort where you are. Find it and defend it would be my other thing. Find it and utilize that to make family memories and to educate your children, but also make sure that you're defending it, because as we've seen, a lot of this, the leftist thing is literally about tearing down our history, replacing our statues, and overlooking all of these wonderful things that remind us of our history and tell the true story of our nation. So make sure that if there's a city meeting about it, if there's anything like this, a protest, a demonstration, go in and lend your support and make sure they're not tearing down these statues and these monuments in your area.
Most cities and towns have their own historical societies. Some of them are open once a week or what have you, and some of them are just treasures. There's one in the little town of Ringe, New Hampshire, where our summer camp had been for a number of years. You go in there and you can touch the things. Here's a musket that was used in the war, the French and Indian War. Here, hold it. Here is a discharge letter that Washington signed to one of the residents here, which of course you're going to preserve it, but it's you don't, you go to some museums, you pay a big fee, and everything's behind glass, but these local places, and it's your town and it's your history. And I discovered some interesting family history at this particular place too. Now I'm like a celebrity when I show up. They just love to have me there, But interesting, you mentioned the monuments being torn down. Just last week, I was in downtown Boston, and there was a beautiful monument to the 54th Regiment. And the 54th was the first that you should refer to, all Negro Regiment. It was a white officer that led it. And I did a video I was going to take a twist on it, but I just wanted to play it straight and talk about the sculpture, St. Gaudens and what have you, and the Bible verses that are on the back of it and so forth. But today, a social justice warrior will look at that and say that should be torn down because it promotes segregation. You had white officers that led these black soldiers. So that's on our YouTube channel. In Boston, we had one. It wasn't really a monument; it was a marker. And George's Island, which is in Boston Harbor, was a Confederate prison during the Civil War. In fact, the vice president of the Confederacy spent some time there. And in the early 60s, the Daughters of the Confederacy, a Boston chapter, see, a lot of the former Confederates moved north where there were more jobs and more opportunities. So they were like reverse carpetbaggers, And they had a chapter of this group. And this group is a patriotic organization. They don't promote racism. Their U.S. flag is their flag. During the World War I, they raised funds, for their sons fought in World War I, and World War II. They did the same thing, and they donated a marker to commemorate or to acknowledge the 12 or 14 men who died there, who died as prisoners. It was there since the 60s. All of a sudden, a social justice warrior saw that, and it was so offensive that the week that we have a cowardly governor, a Republican governor, Baker, he puts plywood around it initially. Well, we don't know what we're going to do with it. And all it had was the logo of the Daughters of the Confederacy, and then the names of the men. That's it. It doesn't say the South shall rise again. We want to get back slavery. Nothing like that. So they put plywood around it. Now, this is the same governor that will march in a so-called gay pride parade where there are men dressed in bondage, and I won't say what they're doing. It's this family entity here, but it's disgusting. That's okay, but don't look at a marker, a historical marker. They put this it made a granite slab. Now it's in storage in Boston, and I'm trying to get it out. So either put it back or I want it. Camp Constitution wants this, and we hopefully, God willing, will have a place in a few years where we can actually put it on display. I will call it the Orwellian History Museum, the Orwellian Memory Hole Museum, because there's a museum. There's a Elmira, New York, it was a prisoner of war camp, and it was quite notorious. They had very high casualties, the Confederate soldiers there, and a former slave, an escaped slave who was a Christian man, made it his duty to bury these people with Christian burial and make sure the next of kin knew about it. He was an honorable man. He lived across the street where there's a little museum there now, John Smith. And there's a market, there's a cemeteries, and there's actually a statue of a Confederate soldier. Now, is that supposed to be offensive? Well, no, what was offensive is these men died. They didn't have to die. It was not like Andersonville, where the people were starving in the South to begin with. They died, and nobody seemed to care a whole lot while it was happening. And I think it should not be swept down a memory hole. It should be acknowledged that these men died there. And you drive by there, and you'll see it. It's not promoting Confederacy. It's not promoting secession. This is a historical place, and what happened here should be known. So and
Yeah.
for good or bad. There's some things in our history that aren't so good, and the good, but the left focus only on the bad.
Hmm.
All they want to do is tell the bad stuff and make it horrible and reprehensible. And we need to say no. We have a very proud history. We afforded the most freedoms for the most amount of people in the history of mankind. And it's
Oh, amen.
interesting.
Of course. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
see too many. I don't see too many people trying to sneak into Cuba or to sneak into Angola or to sneak into communist China or Korea. There all seem to. I don't see too many people trying to sneak into Haiti because the lifestyle is better there. For some reason, they come over here. Well, we know why they come over here, because they have more opportunities than anywhere in the world. One of our instructors at Camp Constitution, Willie Soon, Professor Willie Soon, he's actually from Malaysia. He came here when he was 14, went to school, and he's had great sense of humor. I says, Willie, why didn't you go back to Malaysia? Well, first off, being a Chinese national, you're a second-class citizen. He said, are you crazy? Why would I want to go back to Malaysia after being here? And by the way, Willie is one of the top climate scientists in the world. He's what I call a climate realist. And he gave 2 classes last year at camp, and those are both on our YouTube channel. One of them is
Oh, and
enjoyed over.
somebody in the chat, not to just interrupt you really quick, they're asking for your YouTube channel. Could you tell us what that is real
Yes,
quick? What's the name of it?
yeah, Camp Constitution. Just go to YouTube and put
Okay.
in Camp Constitution, and it comes right up. And we have our classes over the years. I think from 2011, not all of them, but most of them, as well as things we do year round. I got my radio show, so we'll convert that to YouTube video. I just posted one. Obama, when he was 2008, said that we had 57 states. So I got that little video clip of that. I think is kind of, at University of New Hampshire, Southern New Hampshire, where my son actually goes now. He goes as online. A professor was fired recently because the professor insisted that Australia was a continent, not a country, and the student said, no, it's both. And I guess it became so heated that the professor ended up being fired, which I was surprised they would do
Wow.
that. And I was checking on it was Huffington Post, a Huff Post. And they were saying there were some people making comments that, well, these most homeschoolers are ignorant people, and Trump is ignorant and so forth. So I posted that video because I remember hearing about it. So let me see. And sure enough, and I also got a video clip of Oprah Winfrey talking about killing white people who don't agree with her worldview. And I think that stuff's important because these people are being, supposed to be so wonderful and lovely, yet there's some ugly things that, that they say. So
And they're talking about running Oprah Winfrey for president. I mean, they've kind of bantered that around since I was a kid, but people are getting even more serious now with people like, The Rock, the wrestler, and stuff like that, throwing out there that he might, jump in the presidential run the next time or whatnot. And so now, and she's, like you said, I've seen that video clip openly, pretty much calling for the murder of white men, or waiting for them to die out, or however she says.
Yeah, it was. You see her. It was only a 30-second, but the inflection of her voice was not very nice.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, then you define the terms or whatever you. But anyway, we have some good. So please subscribe to it. I've subscribed to your channel, and I'll let people know about you as well. So that's how you get the word out.
I was just going to say we had a super chat come in, and so I just wanted to say, spoiler alert, gave $5. Thank you so much. And he said he wanted to remind us, and to say this on the program, I'm sure, that the Bible was used as a regular textbook through most of the history of schools in our country, and that's something so important to remember and important to point out, that until very recently we used the Bible as a textbook in schools.
Let me mention that a man by the name of Fisher Ames was probably the primary author of the First Amendment. He was a congressman from the town of Dedham, Massachusetts, which abuts Boston. And I did a little video about 4 or 5 years ago, which you can find. I visited his grave site, and there's a little plaque where the home he was born is no longer there, but there's some interesting history that he said that the Bible should be the major book in schools, American schools. And so here's a man who authored the First Amendment. If anybody should know what they meant by that, he should know. And he said the Bible, would be it was interesting too. A friend of mine donated 4 or 5 copies to Camp Constitution of a Bible that was originally published in 1781, 82, under the under the Articles of Confederation. It was published by the U.S. government, and it was reprinted.
Oh,
And there's actually a Bible museum in Arizona that reprinted this, and
uh-huh.
it made the Continental Bible, made it available. Now, I don't think the government should be paying for printing Bibles myself.
Yeah.
But I don't. Yeah, but see, if that was such a separation of church and state, gee, why would they do that? Why would they do that? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It really reveals their true motivations that, of course, have been, lied about and rewritten now by leftists and their agenda. And they don't want us to know about this. They want to create their own history. And much the same way they're making, doing plays and making films, and where, the Romans were black or Joan of Arc was black. This is the same thing that they've been doing. It's just we don't even know sometimes that they've been doing this because we hear this narrative of separation of church and state, and we don't really know where that came from or what it means, or the fact that, if you'd gone to school 100 years ago, this wouldn't have been the same concept. This is not what you would have learned, and you would have run into things like this. We got another super chat just came in, $10 from Tan ST99FL. Thank you so much for that. And he says, love your work, Wife with a Purpose. Keep it up. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for your support. So we're about at the halfway mark here. If you guys are just joining us, let me know, or I'll let you know who we have today. We have Hal. He is from Camp Constitution. You can go to campconstitution.net if you want to learn more about what he does and what they do at Camp Constitution. He's got archives there from some people like Sam Blumenfield, who's one of the pioneers of homeschooling in America. We're having a terrific discussion here. This is my second in a series of elder interviews. So go ahead and click that like button so that people can know to tune into this feed. The more likes we get, the higher that we'll trend in what's going live right now. So let people know about it. So smash that like button. We've got the super chat open if you'd like to use that feature to help support my work. Let us know your thoughts and opinions in the chat. I'm trying to keep an eye on this while we're having this discussion. You guys seem very interested in this topic. You have a lot of interesting things to say. So I'm really appreciating this. So we've talked a bit about your past and your childhood and growing up and things like that. And so we've talked about kind of things that have changed and in schooling and the way that we're taught different things. So what was, in particular, just for you personally, what was your schooling experience like? Like, did you see a lot of change from like when you were in elementary school to when you were, in high school or college age? Like, did you see changes during that period in your lifetime, or like what was the educational system like when you were going through it?
Well, it's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. In the second grade, I had a lot of trouble with the look-say method of reading, the Dick and Jane reader.
Oh,
The teacher told my mother, to teach him at home. Now, my mom was born in 1920. All she knew was phonics. So she taught me phonics.
Mm-hmm.
And from being, we used to call it the dum-dum class or the dum-dum level, within a short time, I was one of the, better students, only because now I know how to read and read properly. So that was an interesting thing. In the 8th grade, I had a history teacher by the name of Mrs. Wolf. I'll never forget her. And I don't know if she was a liberal or a conservative, but she gave me, I already had a love of history and a love of the United States. I think I do a lot to do with my family, going back to the 1600s in Plymouth, Massachusetts and all that, knowing that most people don't. But she had a love of this thing called the U.S. Constitution. We had to memorize the preamble. We had to understand what the preamble was. We had to understand the amendments. And the one thing she said, I think she was wrong at the time. She probably didn't realize it. The 3/5 compromise in the Article 1 of the Constitution, where it says that for every 5 blacks or slaves, that you'd count them as 3 people. And a lot of people, even conservatives, will criticize this, saying that it was basically the Constitution upheld slavery. Well, actually, it was just the opposite. What happened was, in 1787, there were only 2 states that were the non-slave states, Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. There may have been another one with small slave populations. But within a short time, many states got rid of slavery. But states with small slave populations they were concerned that states like Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, with relatively large populations, they would have more members of Congress because, when they do the census, they base the number of members of Congress on how many people you have. So had they gone along and counted every black as a full citizen, there may have been another dozen or so congressmen from these big slave states that would have probably protected the slaveholder interest. So it actually restricted their abilities to have more pro-slavery members of the House. So they made an agreement or a compromise, because if they didn't do that, we wouldn't have a constitution, and who knows what would have happened since then. So it was just the opposite. And also that by 1808, the slave trade was abolished. The importation of slaves was abolished, and they passed a law in 1807, and that was that. And it was a strict penalty. I believe it was either life or a death sentence if you were involved with the importation of slavery. So the U.S. Constitution never said that states themselves could not emancipate the slaves, and a lot of states did. Unfortunately, it took a civil war for the rest of the states to do so. But it's interesting. A lot of these Yankees, and I'm a Yankee, and I had ancestors that fought in the Civil War and died in the Civil War. But they're so high and mighty, and the Confederates this and the Southerners this. They don't realize that Connecticut had slavery up until the 1840s. Mm. New York had slavery to the 1820s. New Jersey still had a few slaves in 1861. So the idea that all of these northern states were pure, and of course we know that they were involved in the triangular trade. The clipper ships would bring the molasses to the Bahamas, and they would bring slaves, and they'd get rum, and they call it the triangular trade, and they made a lot of money off that too. So a lot of people, that's a lot of history that some people don't want to acknowledge.
So. Oh, right. Well, and pretty much every civilization on Earth has had some form of slavery. So, yeah, I think that the southern U.S. getting the brunt of the historical backlash for that is just absolutely, nonsensical.
There's a brilliant man by the name of George Schuyler. He was a black man. He died in 1977. He used to be a socialist. World War I. He was an officer in the army, and he faced discrimination. He became a true blue patriot and an incredible writer. In the late 1940s, he wrote an essay called "The Communist Conspiracy Against the Negro." I can't find it anywhere, even though I have a lot of his writings. He debated Malcolm X on a radio show in New York City, along with James Baldwin, the author, and a writer by the name of C. Lincoln. I can't remember his first name, but Lincoln. And Malcolm X was saying that it was the white man that brought slavery to Africa, the white man, the white man, the white man. And George Schuyler said, no, Mr. Malcolm, he said, it was actually the Muslims that introduced slavery to Black Africa. And he made reference to a particular slave owner, a slave dealer. He lived up until the early 1900s. In Madagascar. I can't remember his name. He said there's statues honoring him, and he was a black man, and he was a Muslim, not a black Muslim. That was something that was created here in the United States, but he was a Muslim that engaged in slavery of people of his own race. So I kind of shut him right up. Malcolm X didn't know, because he didn't know this. He only heard the negative stuff. So that's why it's important to to give a good perspective. So, and the rest of my education, I had a good experience up until the forced busing, and that really opened my eyes a lot too. As I mentioned a little earlier, how the leftists sort of got both sides fighting each other when they should. Hey, I think most parents, black or white, Hispanic, they want good education of their children. They don't need the schools to be social experimentations. And this, to me, is a racist notion that in order to have a good education, you have to have a bunch of white people in your classroom. And it's interesting I mean, if I was a black person, you said my children aren't fully educated unless they got a bunch of whiteys sitting around them, I'd say, what are you talking about? There was a high literacy rate from 1865 till 1960s. The literacy rate almost disappeared in the black community. And then you had forced busing. I don't care what race you are. You can't learn when you're fighting each other, when you got to bring mace or weapons to school to defend yourself. That's not a learning environment. And, you've heard of Marva Collins?
No.
Marva Collins. She was the founder of the West Side Preparatory School in Chicago. My late friend Sam Blumenfeld knew her personally. She was a school teacher in the South Side of Chicago, miserable school system. She decided to start her own school, and she took what were considered the incorrigibles, these young children that couldn't learn. And within a short time, these children are high performers. And they made a movie about it too. And the sad thing is she ended up closing the school I guess Oprah, well, all of her money, couldn't send her a check, to help keep her open. But it's a great success story. It was open for about 20 plus years, but it demonstrates that, that if you have the right method of education and the right people teaching, you're going to have hybrid. It doesn't matter what your background is, you know.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think one of the things that's overlooked is the cultural aspect. And I think that, because it's considered racist now to see differences between people, I think that when we're looking at white culture versus black culture versus Hispanic culture, those are three very distinct cultures, even though blacks, of course, are, the blacks in America are Americans, but they do have a black American culture that in general is a lot different in many respects from white American culture. And when you kind of like put all of these people together, force them all together, not, this isn't, in areas where maybe they've naturally come together because of some other, unifying circumstance, that would be different. But when you force them, when you're literally taking kids from one side of one town and forcing them into another school in another area in a different culture, in a different environment, and then you're giving these black students, for example, these white teachers who don't understand the culture these black kids come from. They don't understand the family structure. They don't understand how things are done in their community. They can't teach them as well. Like, no, in general, not always, but I'm saying in general, I think that it's a benefit to have people that are like you and that come from your culture and your background and who understand how your family dynamics and your neighborhoods work, teaching you and working with you. Because a white teacher might look at a black student who's struggling with something and go, oh, well, you're just hopelessly dumb, because they don't understand maybe a secondary circumstance that's going on in that black child's family that a black teacher might be able to more easily relate to and go, oh, wait, here, I get it. You're struggling with this at home, or this is what's going on with you. Let's try something different. And of course, universally, of course, I'm, that, but I think in general, we overlook that fact that we can kind of help our own sometimes a lot more easily than we can when we're trying to get past cultural barriers as well as educational barriers.
What I think is more important than I think our public schools are a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line, and I don't think we're going to be able to reclaim them for a few generations. So I would advise anybody, black, white, Hispanic, or to get your children out of those schools as quickly as possible. Homeschool, if that's, I mean, to me, we had no option. It wasn't a question of, oh, gee, we couldn't afford a private school or a Christian school. And there's some good, and some of these Christian schools leave a lot to be desired too.
Yes.
Parochial schools in some cases. My oldest daughter went to a very good parochial school, Catholic. I call it a Catholic Christian school. But King Solomon said, you want elder wisdom, just look at the book of Proverbs. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have that as a foundation, you're not going, no matter how much you may know, if you don't have that philosophy, and that should be your foundation. And if that school your child is going to does not have that foundation, I don't care, white, black, or whatever, it doesn't matter. Get your children. That's what get your children out of there, because you're going to lose them. Yeah, sometimes you come out and they're okay. But I used an analogy. A friend of mine, we used to go to church together, younger man at the time, and he thought that Christians should be in public schools, Christian students, Christian parents, the teachers, fine. And he said, well, you need to have their influence. I said, let me ask you something. Now, we went to a Baptist church at the time, a very conservative and Bible-believing Baptist church. And I said, what would happen on the way to the Baptist church, our church, that I dropped my children off at the Unitarian Sunday school? What would you say it to me? Would you question my faith? He said, yeah, I think you're crazy. Why would you do that? And I was saying that because the Unitarians, they don't believe in the Trinity. They're very liberal. They support all of the values that we oppose. So you'd have to say, something's wrong with me. He said, absolutely. So why put him in the Unitarian prep schools 5 days a week for 6 hours a day? And I think I got to him at that point.
Yes,
so
yes.
If you wonder why your children are leftist, or, okay, they made it through public school and you put them in a state college and they turn out and they call you a fascist and they say that because you have plastic bags, you're a neo-Nazi. I mean, crazy stuff like that. Or they say that little baby, that little unborn baby, and they're looking at this little highly developed baby, that's just a pile of cells. And a woman has a right to kill that because it's not really a human being. And they believe that. Something happened there. Get them out of that environment. Absolutely. In fact, there's a great resource, the Freedom Project Education. They have a great YouTube channel. Dr. Duke
Mhm.
Pesta will be one of our instructors at camp at our camp this year.
Oh,
He's a real
excellent. I
researcher.
love him. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's great.
he's a good friend. He'll be one of our instructors at camp this year too. So
Nice.
please, can I have a little time to talk a little bit about our summer camp program?
Oh, please do. Yeah, because we're coming up on the hour. So please tell us
Well,
what you
one of
want
the
to tell
things
us. I want to
we
hear
want
about
to
it.
expand. We only have one summer camp. Where I'm the only full time person. It's most everyone volunteering their time, but our camp runs in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, Western Massachusetts, from April 5th to the 11th, and we've got probably the best lineup of instructors we've had. We have Mrs. Chris Ann Hall, who is a constitutional attorney. She travels all over the country. She has her own website. She has her own radio show. We have Professor Willie Soon. I mentioned him a little while ago. One of the top climate scientists. He's an all-around patriot as well. He's got two sons, Benjamin and Franklin. So he loves America. We have Dr. Duke Pesta. He'll be doing a few classes. He's just coming in for 2 days. He can't spend the whole week. Then we have a British Lord Christopher Monkton,
Mm.
whom I've met a number of years ago. He was one of the leaders in the Brexit movement, and he just loves this country. And he was a former advisor to Margaret Thatcher, and we're really delighted about having him. He's quite a interesting fellow. And we have some of our regulars, Reverend Stevie Kraft. He's a minister from used to be in Harlem, Harlem. Very dynamic guy, loves the Lord, loves the country. Pastor Earl Wallace, author of the Three Dimensional Leader. Then we have a man by the name of Michael King of the Massachusetts Family Institute. I might teach a class or two. We've got a field trip to the Battle of Bennington. We actually have a man from the Sudan who was tortured by the Muslims. He is now a minister. He lives nearby. He's going to be giving a class, Life Under Sharia Law.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
we have campfires every night. It's a good family. It's a family camp, but we also have unaccompanied minors, and we have a professional juggler who'll be there, teaching people how to juggle. And we'll have a few other field trips. We'll be hike up. There'll be a mountain. We're going to be an optional hike up the mountain to Beautiful Lake. And I know that some of you are listening that you might be living far away. We'll do our best. We can pick you up at train stations, bus stations, airports, or we have people coming from the Midwest, and there's an opportunity to carpool. If you can get to Michigan, I can't guarantee it, but so we want to do what we can to help you get there. Or maybe consider starting a camp like ours in your area. It does require some work, but to me, it's worth it. One of the things is that you're making lifetime friends. You
Mhm.
are having a potential life-changing, definitely life-affirming experience. And we tell people that when they leave our camp, they're going to know more than most postgraduate constitutional attorneys, because I should say attorneys, because they don't teach the constitutional law schools. They teach case law for the most part. You're going to
Yeah.
have a real good grasp of history. You're going to have a renewed love of our country. And this is not the most people think this is some kind of complicated thing. It really isn't. It's written in English. There's some archaic terms that you can easily understand, like the word the term well regulated. To the modern mindset, it must be all kinds of laws and rules, right? That's not what they meant. That meant that you were well trained, a well trained militia, because a badly trained militia isn't much help. You can be very regulated. You can have all kinds of rules and regulations, and of course, in the militia, you need that. But if you just have a lot of rules and regulations, you're not going to be any help if you're not well trained. You need to be well trained. And what is a militia compared to a National Guard? Because we really don't have a militia system that we had way back, up at that point. So, it's you can visit our website and you can see all of the different things we do. We have some fun. I think learning is fun. So I don't say just, we got a lot of classes and that's not fun. But we do a lot of fun things, recreational activities. And where else would you want to be in the summertime but in the Berkshires? It's one of the vacation spots of the region, So.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And I love what you said about encouraging people, if they can't get out to your camp, maybe to start one in their own area. And I think that that's so important. The last interview I did on my Thursday show last week was with a gentleman, and we were talking about that. We're talking about, politics is one thing, and pushing things on a political level is one thing, but just grassroots organization at the cultural level is so much more influential in the long term. And
That's
if you
right.
can get together with like-minded people and you can build these communities around these ideas and around these cultures and this history and teaching this to our children and all of these things, then you can really, really affect change in our country at an incredibly deep level and a more real level than the average person can with sometimes with a lot of political activism. And so I really encourage people, it's February now, you might be thinking about summertime, you might be thinking about family vacations or kind of what you want to do with summertime that you have. And if you can't get to, I would definitely recommend Camp Constitution, because this sounds amazing. And this lineup, I'm just like drooling over the line of people that he's having. Yeah. But if you can't get there, try to get something together in your own area. And the thing is, you don't have to have super huge names. You can even just get some families together to go camping, pick a campsite, everybody pay their $25 or whatever a night for their, bring their own tent, and have a couple of dads and moms get together and just talk about what they know, or do some activities. Maybe you've got a dad who knows how to shoot a bow and arrow. Maybe he can show the boys how to do that. Anything like that. Get together as a group.
One year we had musket training. We had one of our instructors, Pastor Garrett Lear, the Patriot pastor, 6'7", dressed in the Black Robe Regiment outfit, which is authentic. And we didn't fire the musket balls, but we fired the black powder. But we did have one class. We took campers out on a nearby gun range and learned familiarization. Insurance purposes, we couldn't really do live firing except for BBs and BBs and things like that. But they were familiar, learned about the different types of weapons and the safety factor, of course. And the fact is, our camp instructor, the instructor was also a camp doctor. And he said the first rule of safety, gun safety, is own one. Own a gun to begin. And so, so we actually are looking into starting a camp in Michigan, Ohio. I was out there back in November. We have people that come as far as Grand Rapids, and we still want them to come. But I spoke to some homeschool groups, several homeschool groups, and homeschool groups are just what we say a target market for us, or they say around here a target market. We also do information tables at homeschool shows, and sometimes we do workshops. And I'll be doing a homeschool show in Maine in March, one in Massachusetts in April, and be doing one in Lancaster, Pennsylvania in June, which is a pretty good one. And I'm always looking we may do one in Florida. It depends on if the funds come in or not. A lot of that's incumbent upon whether the funds come in. We're looking at a weekend camp in South Jersey. And we're just trying to make sure we can secure the funds so we can go ahead and do that. But if anyone's interested, I could come out, or someone that's involved. We have a speakers bureau. If you go to our website, you'll see the different speakers we have available, and we can come out. I'm actually partnering with Tom DeWeese. I don't know if you know who Tom DeWeese is. Mm-mm. Tom is with the American Policy Center. He's one of the top experts on Agenda 21. And I was very honored when he asked me to participate in his organization to actually do presentations on his organization's behalf. And I've done, I don't know, close to 250 of them in the last 7 or 8 years, all around the Northeast, Midwest. So I'm hopefully, to expand that as well. Yeah.
Excellent. Yes. And you know what really stands out for me, and some people here are talking about it in the chat. Truebag Pipe Rock says this stuff is what it's all about. Never had this as a boy. And I think that's really important to point out, that our society doesn't serve our young men the way it used to in education, in training them on how just role models and mentors, and to learn about history, but also to learn about what you're talking about, taking out an old musket and learning how these things work, and having men that they can look up to. And I know that I have a teenage boy, and he is just thirsty for that. Like mentors, like men. He loves to go to any kind of church function where it's the guys are organizing it, like where the dads are putting this together. And he just got back from a youth camp where they had speakers, and, they had a guy who was kind of like a comedian sort of guy that they brought in to speak to the youth. And my son just, he goes on and on and on about this guy. Oh, he was so funny. And he told this story about, how he got along with his brothers when they would fight when they were little, and how they worked it out. And he told it in a funny way. And just seeing my son's eyes light up, because, when boys become teenagers, they just need those role models. They need those other men. They need to know, what does it mean to be a man? And right now, what the media and what the schooling is telling them about how to be a man is not really how to be, they're telling them
Be a
gender
wimp.
fluid and transgender and drag queens and all of this stuff. We need to be countering this.
You're right. I have one boy. He's 20 years old. He's a leader in the church. I'm very proud of him. I tease people. I said to people, he wants to be a gunsmith. You know, I said, where do I go wrong? You know, he was supposed to be a social worker. You know, not too many boys in Boston become gunsmiths. So he's hopefully be one of. We also have a publishing arm, Camp Constitution Press, and I just have a few of the props, but one of them is a bumper sticker that you might be appreciate. No amnesty. That's dealing with the illegal immigration.
Like that.
This is we actually published a book a couple of years ago. It was on the Illuminati, and they say, you know, that's kind of a, you know, not why you bring this up. Well, the man who wrote this book in 1804. And he lived in the town. He was the pastor in the town of Ridge, New Hampshire. So we were visiting the Historical Society, and they had copies of it was a reprinted version. And I said, "Gee, why would you sell this book?" And he said, "Well, because the pastor of this church, as he ran a campaign, he became a state rep." It's a fascinating account of what happened back. There's always been enemies of our country, you know, from the very beginning, and a lot of people don't understand that. And so we don't indulge in crazy theories, but this is some factual things, and we thought we'd put it back in print. Then there's one of my favorites. It's called the Not Yours to Give, Davy Crockett story. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not. He was a member of Congress before he went to the Alamo, and if he stayed in Congress, he may not have been killed. But he was on the campaign trail, and he bumped into a farmer, Horatio Bunce, and he asked him for his vote. I'm running for re-election. He said, "You're probably a good guy, but you don't know the Constitution." I said, "I keep in touch of what's going on in Washington, D.C., and you voted for something. It's not yours to give." He voted to relieve, there was a fire in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., and they spent some federal money to alleviate some of the people who suffered losses. And he said, "That's not what the money's for in the Treasury." He said, "So I can't trust you." So he apologized. And he ended up, coming back and admitting he was wrong, and so it became, I call it like a free market classic. So we made this, and when campers come to camp, they get a little batch. We got one reprint by Robert Welch called "Republics and Democracies," because we are not a democracy, and I still hear people democracy. The founders wanted nothing to do with a democracy. If you read the Federalist Papers, Federalist 10, James Madison, he said, "Democracies have been ever spectacles of turbulence and contention, short in their lives and violent in their deaths." And that's another reason why the founders made it so difficult to change this Constitution, to amend it. They didn't make it easy for a reason.
Yeah.
You see, so when people leave our camp, there's two things they're probably going to learn. They're going to learn the preamble of we recite it every morning before we do the flag raising, after the Bible reading, and they're going to learn that we're a republic, not a democracy, and why we're not just regurgitating what they hear, but understanding. So if they learn nothing else, they're going to come out of there with those two things.
Excellent. And those are terrific foundations. I mean, much like having a foundation in the Bible, which we kind of talked about earlier, I think particularly for Americans to have a foundation in what our country is actually about and what it was founded for, and to get a really clear vision of the intentions of our founders. Because again, like I said, it's been rewritten, and they've tried to tell lies about it and rewrite it and present it as something it wasn't. And when we have a good foundation in both the Bible, and then we have a good foundation in our country, I mean, America and Americans can do great things. I wanted to thank you so much for joining me today. This was a terrific interview. I am so excited about your program, and I wish you guys so much luck this year in your camp and in your. It sounds like you've had a terrific history with this camp and a bright future.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, thank you. All right. Well, thank you guys that joined us in the chat. We had a really great chat discussion going on during this interview, and we had some wonderful super chats. I thank you guys so much for donating. I thank you so much for your support. I will be back on Thursday with my regular Thursday show. I think it's just going to be me, and we'll do kind of an Ask Me Anything in the chat this Thursday if you guys want to do that. So start thinking about questions and topics that we can go over. Anything that you want to talk about. I know I get so many questions every day from you guys, and I can't always address all of them. So be thinking a little bit ahead of time, and we'll get something together, and I'll definitely be open to talk about whatever you guys want to. Please go to campconstitution.net. look at what they've got over there. This is a tremendous program. This is wonderful for families and especially for young men. I'm thinking about this camp would be wonderful for. If you can't get to their camp, think about starting something even on a very small level yourself. Get together with a couple of families this summer. Start planning some camping and outings. Start getting together with other dads at your church, or maybe people that you've met online through the online movements that we've had growing these past couple of years. Get together, make some friends, have your kids learn from some other people. Just bring whatever small talent you have. Your kids will love it. It'll be wonderful. I want you guys to have a really wonderful rest of your week. And again, another plug, if you are an elder and you would like to be interviewed, please contact me at whiteayla@protonmail.com. If you have an elder in your family, a parent, a grandparent, and you would really like to bring them on my channel, please go ahead and contact me. And we can do it anonymously too. If they're camera shy or they don't want to share their name, we can do it with the camera off over Google Hangouts, however you want to do it. But let's get this information out there. Let's get it recorded. Let's share this. Let's grow our communities. And let's start really working from the ground up to improve the situation for our people and for our country. So you guys have a tremendous rest of your day, and I will talk to you later. Thanks. Bye-bye.